Well, hi everyone. I'm Sheetal. My name rhymes with lethal. And really excited to be here with Stephanie and Devin to talk more about finding the gems when investing in better cities. Um, 17 Asset Management, as some of you may or may not know, is actually launching a venture fund focused on improving livability, efficiency, and economic prosperity in urban areas. So really wanting to look at investing in early stage startups that are not only having some sort of financial return, but also a scalable impact. And one of the biggest questions that we're trying to answer is like, what does impact actually look like? How do we ensure that we're aligning our investment decisions, both pre-investment and also post-investment, with the SDG 11? And so super excited to have Devin and Stephanie here to kind of talk a little bit more about like, what does inclusivity look like? What does accessibility look like, especially when it comes to cities? And how can we think about that as we're evaluating companies making investment decisions? And then also kind of dive into what they're seeing in the market in terms of like innovation as it addresses like those impact spaces. So I will turn it over to you both to introduce yourself, because I actually didn't get an intro bio on Devin. So I have yours, Stephanie, and I'm more than happy to introduce you, but I don't have yours, Devin. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and have you introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be a part of this conversation. Thank you to 17 Asset Management for organizing today. My name is Devin. I started the Canvas about 5 years ago. This was a spinoff of a t-shirt business that I started in high school. And what happened was we realized there were two huge problems in fashion and real estate that sort of coincided and presented a unique opportunity to leverage within one another to build what we've done now with the Canvas. And that was, there's a tremendous amount of vacant real estate globally in major cities. Spaces are sitting empty, unused. Landlords are paying water, electricity, and utilities for them, doing nothing at all to revitalize the neighborhoods they're in. And there are hundreds of thousands of independent brands, often artisans focused on sustainability, focused on making good product well and supporting their local communities. And they're not able to sell that product in a physical space. It's very difficult. You're not going to open a store. You're not going to necessarily invest in that kind of risk-taking venture as a small brand, as a small business. And so what Shopify and the like have done with e-commerce is just not possible when it comes to physical retail. And so we thought, how do we allow any independent brand in the world to open a physical retail store? And that is what we're now trying to do with the Canvas.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure. So my name is Stephanie Enyart. I'm the Chief Public Policy and Research Officer at the American Foundation for the Blind. I've spent about 20 years doing disability rights advocacy in nonprofits, both at the grassroots and the grass tops level. My role at the American Foundation for the Blind is to promote and curate knowledge related to the blind and low vision community and use that to leverage change at the federal level in terms of legislation and regulation and systemic barrier removal. So I'm here to speak about that more than anything, because investment is not necessarily my wheelhouse, but there is obviously a lot of opportunity embedded in the kind of challenges that we research and advocate around.
Yeah, and to both of your points and what you both do, there's a lot of components of impact that you need to consider in an investment decision. And I think it's things that are often forgotten. So I'm glad to have you both on this panel to chat through that. I will go back and forth with questions just specific to each individual, but feel free to chime in if you have any comments. Stephanie, just given your extensive experience, would love to hear a little bit more about challenges that you've seen in cities around like accessibilities, and just like speaking a little bit more to that.
Sure. So in 2019, the American Foundation for the Blind conducted a study of older adults who had lost vision and couldn't drive anymore because of their disability. 1/5 of the urban respondents explained that they wanted to move within the next 5 to 10 years, which would be right around now, because they desired more walkable neighborhoods, better access to public transit, better affordable housing, access to services, and they also wanted to be closer to supportive family members. 1/4 of those urban respondents felt that not driving prevented them from being able to participate in the activities that were meaningful to them. And this was interesting because, in comparison with the rural respondents, they certainly had more modes of transit available to them in the urban environment. And we compared the urban and rural groups, and the rural respondents really truly did travel less. But the urban respondents were much more disgruntled about the fact that they couldn't stay where they were. And they listed off a variety of different reasons why. And a lot of them boiled down to the inflexibility of the types of transit options that they had, and the fact that they couldn't be spontaneous. They couldn't go to certain destinations at all because they were too far for either rideshare or paratransit services, or because they were outside of the service area altogether. And so what this looked like is that, I can also speak from my own personal experience as a blind woman. It's actually easier for me to get from my DC area home to downtown London than it is for me in terms of cost and time to travel to my rural California hometown. And so, it's because of the way that we have to blend modes of transit. Similarly, if I want to go hiking, or if I want to do a multi-stop short sort of shopping trip, I really do need to find somebody else who could drive me as a friend versus pay for the different options available. And so I highlight this because a lot of this is interconnected to the way that cities function and the way that cities are also walkable or not walkable. Many cities also have very inconsistent sidewalk networks where the width of the sidewalks, the safeness of the curb cuts of the sidewalks, and whether or not there are or are not marked crosswalks impede independent travel. And so we are in an age where technology can assist us to a certain degree, where we have Google Maps and similar technologies that are able to help us understand if sidewalks exist. But it's actually few and far between when you look at cities that are able to tell if they don't have schematics for determining whether or not they have adequate sidewalks for people with disabilities. One other issue is that there's also, in terms of the city planning element, when you're in a high volume or a high traffic area, some of those types of roadways can impede safe and independent foot travel on city streets, and people are put in positions to have to pay for things like an Uber just to be able to get from where they are on one side of the freeway to the other, in a safe way based on the lack of sidewalk access. So those are some of the issues.
Is there any city or organization or company you think that has kind of tried to address those issues or close the gap in some way?
I mean, there are definitely advocates that are focused on advocating around these issues, but I don't know if there is that kind of comprehensive space that you speak of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Kind of moving to Devin a bit more. You had mentioned that your organization actually transformed a lot more urban spaces, but can you just elaborate a little bit more on your business model and how it allows entrepreneurs and people to access metropolitan areas, and why is this innovation important?
One thing that's very clear, and I think the common thread between the two conversations that we're having is cities have overlooked something pretty substantial in a big part of their respective communities. And I think when it comes to retail space, which is at the heart of any vibrant city, especially malls and urban gathering places, take an example like the Westfield World Trade Center, where we have 4 different retail spaces. The bigger tenants in that mall do not pay a full rent if the building isn't a certain percentage occupied. So our original pitch to Westfield was, we're going to come into the building, we're going to take as many vacancies as you're willing to give us, we're going to activate it with different retail concepts. Everybody else is going to pay rent. We're not going to. We're going to pay you a revenue share. And that is what enabled the startup of our size and our caliber to actually make an entry point into a large mall and bring with us 150 independent brands and creators from 30 countries, one of which, just as an example, Clandestina, Cuba's first independent fashion brand. This is a group of people that started a business in Cuba, which clearly very, very challenging to do, had the semi-support of the government to be left alone at the very best, was able to establish a side business in the US so that they could export product. And now we're legally able to work with them to open stores. That is, I think, a success story of from one urban space to another global collaboration. And I think the creative ways we can think about solving some of these problems really starts with how do we make better use of urban space to the benefit of individuals rather than large corporations or the government.
What's your long-term vision of the canvas?
I think we can open our phone and we can look at Airbnb, and in 5 clicks, we can book a room or a home in any place in the world. And I think any independent creator should have the same level of access to get their physical or digital product in front of hundreds of thousands of people a day. It's not that hard. There just needs to be a way to do it. And that is what we're trying to build. So at the moment, we're finishing up the beta version of our app. This will allow any brand to go and look at every vacant space on the planet that we've scrubbed from Westfield, from Simon, from every other large mall operator and the other platforms that list vacant spaces. And in 5 clicks, pay a membership fee for 1 year and subscribe to it. That membership fee is equivalent to what many brands pay for 1 weekend or 1 week at a pop-up in a major city at the moment. And so this model that we've created to reduce the cost and the risk for both ourselves and the brands have allowed us to pass that savings, both from a cost perspective and a risk perspective, back to the brand. And everything that we do, and I know John will emphasize that I should talk about this, everything we do is about the UN Sustainable Development Goals being at the heart of the businesses that we work with. The word sustainability, I think, has been somewhat corrupted. It's overused. It's a marketing ploy. We ask our brands to, in detail, tell us how they addressed at least 1 to 3 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in the way that they produce their product. That allows us to say from goal number 1, which is no poverty, to goal number 17, partnerships for the goals. This is how we are actually making a difference. We're not just going to say we're sustainable. And I think that's got to end across the board, regardless of industry. ESG cannot be a sticker that we slap on things just to make it through the first round and get public opinion where we want it to be about any product, project, or politician.
Do you guys have any sort of like metrics that you use with the individuals that you work with, brands that you work with?
That is exactly what we're getting started working on with 17. I hope John won't mind me saying. But one thing that we've actually, we've had some very interesting conversations about this is how do you create metrics for problems that are global and are not necessarily the same in different contexts. We've had people come in to our retail stores, pick up a leather bag and scream at our sales associates, how could this be sustainable? It's leather. The reality is that leather bag is supporting a local economy in Bali. So sustainability means different things to different people at different times. And I think that is the most important part of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is not this thing that you can just copy and paste on anything. Nuance is required. We need to go through the complications and the complexities of it. And if we take this blanket approach, it leads to, I think, misunderstanding and the opportunity to greenwash ultimately.
Cool. Thank you. And you both kind of touched on this a little bit, but would love if you both could elaborate in your own day-to-day, whether that's research and policy or in the company that you've started, how you utilize technology and how you think it's like, but could potentially play a pivotal role in what you do, and just elaborating on that a little bit more.
Well, I could take the rest of the time that we have here, but I won't. I'm actually going to move to one of the questions that I thought you might ask related to technology, because a huge space within the disability advocacy realm right now is really the way that the virtual environment is developing. And, we have things like the Americans with Disabilities Act that really helped kind of regulate the accessibility of the built environment. And that does indeed apply to the virtual environment. But the challenge is that we've been 33 years with this piece of legislation, and it hasn't been regulated until literally right now. So there is an open comment period for state and local government regulation related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that over the next couple of weeks, that's what many will be focused on, trying to kind of get it right in terms of what websites and applications and how they can be used by people with disabilities, because there are many accessibility issues, especially within the blind and low vision community. And so one of the things that I wanted to touch on a little bit is that the American Foundation for the Blind did put forward a study that I know that it was something that we worked on, but there's very little research like this out there that really shows you the extent of the problem in terms of accessibility, in terms of the websites and app environment. And this study essentially found that among blind users, 90% of the blind website users reported at least occasional barriers when booking air, train, and bus travel, 90% when applying for jobs online, 88% when ordering food online, 86% when shopping online, and that these barriers have costs for people with disabilities, but also for the businesses themselves. About 80% of the respondents reported frustration that they didn't have as much independence as others online. And more than 40% said that they would switch to a different business after encountering an accessibility barrier. So there's certainly something for the market to pay attention to when you have millions of people potentially switching businesses based on just basic accessibility. About 60% felt like they didn't have the same choices in businesses as others. And about 65% reported that they give up on tasks and transactions altogether because of inaccessibility. So this is a cross-sector problem that most certainly, affects many different sectors and millions of people. The interesting thing is that there have always been some standards related to the design of websites and applications, but they haven't been regulated until now. And so I believe as we see regulation in this space, there will probably be a lot of investment potential opportunity from the standpoint that there will be a lot of state and local entities trying to figure out how to make sense of their legal obligations and avoid litigation. In terms of what this will take, I mean, it will take also developers truly getting up to speed and understanding these new kind of building codes, so to speak. And there's a huge knowledge gap there as well, because we don't have accessibility being taught in university settings and as part of like accreditation programs or anything. So from an educational standpoint, there will also be some opportunities there. So.
Is there like any potential pitfalls that as investors we should be aware of when investing in like certain technologies, especially around like cities and infrastructure and things like that? Like there's a lot of technology out there that's trying to make things easier, but probably not inclusive of people with disabilities. And how can we ensure that the technology that we're investing in is keeping that in mind? Are there certain things that we should be aware of?
There are companies that are considered quote unquote overlay companies that can, the technology itself is meant to kind of, from a technological standpoint, just go in and diagnose the strength or accessibility of that website or app and be able to give you kind of this automated report. And there's a lot of different flaws in the way that technology is operating in this regard. In other words, it doesn't actually represent the user experience. And so like the path of travel that I take to go and book my train ticket here from DC is a specific path. And so I have to be able to hit the go button when I've put things in the cart and that sort of thing. But the way that the technology that's on the market is widely being used, it doesn't really look at like paths of travel through those digital environments. And so it does require a bit of user testing to be able to actually double check that the computer or the software is getting it right. And so I would actually be very cautious in basically investing in overlay companies, because I think that they're not necessarily going to be the full and complete answer. So
That's good to know. And this question is targeted to both of you. Just like building on the importance of innovation, like what types of innovations do you think are needed in cities, specifically for greater accessibility, greater inclusivity, use of space and things like that? Like what types of innovations are really needed here?
Well, I would just say simply that everything you just said speaks to the point that a lack of accessibility is bad business. And that's true in the case of physical accessibility, and also in the case of having people around the world with something to offer and not really giving them the opportunity to offer it when it could very easily be given. These are solvable problems, and not coming up with solutions for them is not good for anybody. And at the top of that list are the investors. So,
Stephanie?
So I think that in terms of an opportunity, I know autonomous vehicles are going to be really, truly a game-changing force in our lives, broadly speaking, but in terms of the non-driving community, which would include older adults, which could include people with disabilities. From a city perspective, there needs to be a lot of planning related to the way that I guess the way that this technology could interact with the city. In other words, if you're dropping somebody off in the middle of a block, that might not be a big deal for someone who is able-bodied and can hop out of the vehicle and just go over to the curb. But it could be a completely dangerous environment if you're someone with a variety of disabilities and you need to navigate around the cyclists and motorcyclists that are coming up on the right side and in between the cars, or anything else that might be, in that space. So right now we're at a spot where autonomous vehicles, from what I understand, don't know how to drop us off at a corner. And until we get to that spot, in terms of the way that cities are designed, and we have streeteries and all of these other things now, we're at the spot where the autonomous vehicle is not smart enough to get us to a safe spot. But similarly, from a design perspective, if you're looking at autonomous vehicles, the vehicles themselves will also have to be accessible, because people like me, who can certainly use technology with accessibility when it's developed accessibly, I can use touch screens like my Apple devices because they have accessibility built in. So I can use the same device that other people can, but they will have to make sure that there's non-visual access embedded in the controls of that autonomous vehicle. I'm sure everyone is sitting here going, gosh, we don't want blind people in autonomous vehicles. I get that, but they already are in autonomous vehicles. So we can already drive them in certain cities. So we've already arrived at this like conundrum. But the way that these vehicles are constructed will also impact people with mobility disabilities who may need to be able to transfer into that vehicle, bring their wheelchair with them as well. So we could be excluding groups of people that desperately need that form of transit, that would really benefit from it if we don't kind of design the vehicles and the infrastructure in the city around what is needed to make it actually work.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of probably what we're thinking about when we look at startups and looking at certain investments don't really consider the accessibility component, because I mean, I would say a majority of us are not in the same position as you. And so like having that user experience and that knowledge and your experience and sharing that with us, I think is a huge insight in for us to understand, okay, like these are perspectives that you don't really consider, but are very important to ensuring that, we aren't just looking at, climate change. We're not just looking at economic prosperity. We're really looking at trying to scale for all types of people that live in cities or rural areas. So really appreciate that insight. Before I turn it over to questions, wanted to just give you guys a chance to share anything else just about the organizations you work for, or any of the thoughts that you might just have.
I will say that to kind of build on your last point, there is a bit of a mantra within the disability rights movement around, there's been a lot of decisions made on behalf of or that impact people with disabilities, but without them at the table. And, it's nothing about us without us. And I think that if you're trying to design cities and the infrastructure that interfaces in a truly inclusive way, getting that perspective in the design phase and in the development phase and the implementation phase is something that will yield a better result, because there are millions of people with disabilities. It's 1 in either 6 or 1 in 8. If you're looking at different data sources within the United States, have a disability, and people are aging into this category. I mean, if we all live long enough, we're all going to have a disability. And then within the World Health Organization's numbers, it's 1 in 7. And so this is a huge part of the population. And if we basically kind of include those perspectives and experiences as we kind of develop any sorts of projects, I think that we would end up with a more inclusive end goal.
I would just say that there are now alternatives to the way that we shop. And they're out there, and there's many well beyond what we're doing. And I think that as creatures of habit, we sometimes default to the simplest way, and H&M and Zara and Topshop and Forever 21 have all sort of provided that for America for decades now. And the fact that a new alternative is arising it's not necessary. It's not inherent that it's going to succeed. It's going to require, I think, a slow flipped switch in all of our minds that we can do things differently, and it does not require much more effort. It just requires keeping our eyes open for new opportunities, and then it goes beyond getting a $10 shirt. It's actually supporting people from around the world, and they're now out there. And I hope that we at the Canvas can continue to contribute to more of them. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you both. Open it up to questions. Oh, I think he's bringing the microphone. Is that a microphone? That's a microphone.
If I could follow up on your comments, because I work with startups and I help build them, right? And one of the things that I talk to the startups about is being ethical. But I also know that the disability, and the opportunities to serve those markets are huge. And I think your point is well taken, is that the people who have the disabilities actually need to inform us. How would you best propose doing that in a way that is sensitive, not like, okay, we need a blind person here, we need this person here, and randomly reaching out to, different groups? Because I do want to include it. And there was some product development done for seniors, right? Where young people had to have weights on their legs and things like that. I thought that was brilliant. Is there anything like that you could suggest?
Possibly my background in running a policy and research institute will color my answer here, but I would say focus groups. I've been part of them, and I think that they're probably a really healthy and effective way in getting the feedback loop, but also just the partnerships. There's a lot of kind of user testing, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about products. Many companies do user testing. So whether you're researching within our community with a focus group, or having us use and test something and give the feedback loop, I think both are really helpful options for getting that feedback at the stage that you need it.
Anyone else?
One other thing, you could also hire more people with disabilities too. So.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much, Stephanie and Devin. That was very insightful.